He said her love was a cage. He told his inner circle that her care felt like a noose tightening around his immortal neck. Dominic Blackwood, the vampire king of New York, wanted space. He wanted the silence of his old life back. But he forgot one crucial lesson about the human heart. Once it breaks, it doesn't just stop loving. It closes off completely. Sarah heard every cruel word he whispered in the shadows. And when she decided to give him the space he begged for, Dominic realized too late that the only thing worse than being suffocated by love is freezing to death in the void of its absence. The fluorescent lights of the midnight diner buzzed with the sound of a dying fly. It was 2:00 a.m. in Brooklyn, and Sarah Miller was scraping dried egg yolk off a ceramic plate. Her apron, stained with coffee and ketchup, smelled like grease and exhaust fumes. It was a far cry from silk and velvet, but it was real. It was her life. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She wiped her hands on a rag and checked it. Don't wait up. Council business runs late. No, I love you. No sleep well. Just a cold directive from a cold man. Sarah sighed, typing back a quick, left a thermos of O negative in the fridge behind the kale. Love you, Dom. She stared at the screen for a minute. The status changed to read. There was no reply. Sarah dated Dominic Blackwood. To the human world, he was a reclusive venture capitalist who owned half the skyline. To the underworld, he was the vampire king of the eastern seaboard, a creature of immense power, ancient politics, and lethal temper. To Sarah, he was just Dom, the man who had saved her from a mugging 2 years ago, the man whose eyes looked like shattered glaciers, the man she was desperately trying to thaw, but lately the ice seemed to be thickening. Sarah clocked out at 3:00 a.m., Clear's throat. Usually, one of Dominic's drivers would be waiting. Tonight, the alley was empty. It wasn't a mistake, it was a message. Take the subway. When she finally arrived at Dominic's penthouse, a sprawling fortress of glass and steel overlooking Central Park, the silence was absolute. The air conditioning was always set to a temperature that chilled Sarah to the bone. She kicked off her cheap sneakers, placing them hidden inside the closet so they wouldn't ruin the aesthetic of the marble foyer. She walked into the living room. Dominic was there standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of dark red liquid in his hand. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could hear her heartbeat. "You're home," Sarah said softly, fighting the exhaustion in her voice. She walked over, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against the expensive fabric of his suit. "You didn't reply to my text. I was worried the council meeting went south." Dominic stiffened. He didn't lean into her touch. He stood like a statue. "It was business, Sarah. If I was in danger, you would be the last to know for your own safety." "I know," she murmured, squeezing him tighter. I missed you. We haven't had a real dinner in 2 weeks. I was thinking maybe tomorrow night I could swap shifts with Jenny. I could make that risotto you used to tolerate." Dominic pulled away gently but firmly, breaking her hold. He walked to the side table to set down his glass. "I have a gala tomorrow, the Vanderhoven charity event. It's unavoidable." "I can come," Sarah offered quickly, her eyes lighting up. "I still have that blue dress from the Christmas party. I can be ready in—" "No," Dominic cut her off. The word was sharp like a whip crack. He turned to look at her, his pale face unreadable, his eyes showing a flicker of annoyance. "It is not a place for you, Sarah. It's complicated. The politics are volatile right now. Having you hanging off my arm is a distraction I cannot afford." Sarah felt the sting, but she pushed it down. She was used to this. He was protecting her, she told herself. He was an ancient king dealing with walls she couldn't understand. It was her job to be the soft place for him to land. "Okay," she said, forcing a smile. "I get it, but are you hungry? Did you drink the thermos?" "I'm fine," Dominic sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Sarah, please go to bed. I have calls to make. I can make you some tea or just sit with you while you work," she pressed, taking a step forward. "You look stressed, Dom. Let me help." "Sarah." His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a low growl that triggered a primal fear in her hindbrain. "Stop. Just stop hovering. I do not need tea. I do not need risotto. I need to think without feeling your anxiety radiating off you like a heat wave." Sarah froze. The rejection hit her square in the chest. She nodded slowly, retreating toward the hallway. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just love you." Dominic didn't answer. He was already dialing a number on his secure phone, turning his back to her. Sarah went to the master bedroom, a room that felt more like a museum exhibit than a home. She crawled into the massive bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin. She smelled his cologne on the pillows, sandalwood and iron. She fell asleep, telling herself that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow she would try harder to be what he needed. She didn't know that trying harder was exactly what was driving him away. The following evening, the city was draped in a torrential downpour. Thunder rattled the windows of the penthouse, but inside it was silent. Dominic had left hours ago for the Van der Hoven Gala. Sarah was sitting on the kitchen counter, eating a cup of instant noodles. The contrast was laughable. A three-day meal in a $20 million apartment. She stared at her phone. She knew she shouldn't. She knew he said no. But her intuition was screaming. Earlier that day, while cleaning up Dominic's study, something he told her never to do, she had found a threats assessment file on the desk. A rogue clan from Chicago was in town. They targeted partners. They targeted weaknesses. If he's at the gala, he's exposed. She thought, he thinks I'm the liability, but what if he's blind to the real threat? Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't go as his date. She would go as his shadow. She didn't wear the blue dress. She wore a sleek, unassuming black gown she had found at a thrift store, pinned her hair up tightly, and wore a mask she had bought for Halloween years ago. It was a masquerade gala, after all. She could blend in. She just needed to be near him just to make sure he was safe. If she saw anything suspicious, she'd alert his security detail, Silas, and vanish before Dominic ever saw her. The venue was the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. It was dripping with crystals, gold leaf, and the heavy metallic scent of vampires mixed with the floral perfumes of the human elite. Sarah slipped in through the catering entrance. Flashing an old ID badge, she hadn't returned from a catering gig 2 years prior. She moved to the edge of the ballroom, sticking to the shadows. She spotted him immediately. Dominic Blackwood commanded the room. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, holding court with 3 other vampires. He looked regal, terrifying, and utterly beautiful. Standing next to him was not Silas, but a woman, Vanessa. Vanessa was everything Sarah was not, tall, ancient, and radiating a cold, predatory elegance. She was a vampiress of the old world, a countess who had been Dominic's lover a century ago. She had a hand resting possessively on Dominic's forearm. He didn't shake it off. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. He told me it was dangerous. He didn't tell me it was a date. She crept closer, hiding behind a massive pillar adorned with white roses. She needed to hear them. She needed to know if they were discussing the threat from Chicago. "The Chicago clan is quiet tonight," Vanessa said, her voice like silk over gravel. She swirled her champagne, which Sarah knew was spiked with blood. "You seem tense, Dominic." Is the crown weighing heavy? Dominic sighed, a sound of genuine exhaustion that Sarah rarely heard. "It is not the crown, Vanessa. It is the domesticity." Sarah's breath hitched. She leaned closer, pressing her hand against the cold marble pillar. "The little waitress." Vanessa laughed softly. It was a cruel, tinkling sound. "Is she still playing house in your penthouse? I thought you would have tired of that novelty by now." "It is not a novelty," Dominic said, though his voice lacked defense. She is loyal, she is good. Good is boring, darling, and from what I hear, good is becoming a burden. Dominic, Clear's throat, took a long drink from his glass. He looked out over the crowd, his eyes landing on a couple dancing nearby. She is suffocating me, Vanessa. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stop the gasp. She is everywhere, Dominic continued, his voice lowering, dripping with frustration. I turn around, and she is there with a drink I didn't ask for. I check my phone, and there are 3 messages asking about my day. I come home to Swans, and she fills it with chatter about her mundane human life at the diner. She clings, Vanessa. She clings like a vine trying to pull down a tree. So cut the vine, Vanessa suggested ruthlessly. I cannot just throw her out, Dominic said, looking down at his glass. She has no one. She built her entire world around me. It's pathetic, really, how much she needs me. I feel like I'm drowning in her affection. I need air. I need space. I need to be around my own kind. Someone who doesn't require constant validation. Pathetic. The word echoed in Sarah's mind. Pathetic. She looked down at her hands, the hands that scrubbed tables to buy him gifts he didn't want, the hands that rubbed his shoulders when he was tense, the hands that held him when the bloodlust gave him nightmares. Pathetic. She is a sweet girl, Dominic added almost as an afterthought, twisting the knife deeper, but she is a child playing in a world of monsters. I'm tired of babysitting. I just want to go home to an empty house for once. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in Sarah's eyes. She didn't wait to hear Vanessa's reply. She didn't look for the Chicago assassins. If Dominic Blackwood was powerful enough to break her heart into a million pieces from across a room, he was powerful enough to handle a few rogue vampires. Sarah turned around. She didn't run. She wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her flee. She walked. She walked with a strange, numb steadiness toward the exit. She pushed through the heavy double doors and out into the rainy New York night. The rain soaked her thrift store dress, instantly plastering the fabric to her skin. She stripped off the mask and threw it into a gutter. She took out her phone. 3 unread messages from Sarah. Left a thermos. Hope the meeting is going okay. Love you. She stared at the texts. They did look pathetic. They looked like the desperate ramblings of a woman who didn't know she was already single. She opened the contact Dom and hit block. Then she opened her photo gallery. 2 years of memories, birthdays, lazy Sundays, the one time he smiled at Coney Island. Select all. Delete. She hailed a yellow cab. Where to, lady? The driver asked, eyeing her soaked gown. Queens? Sarah said, her voice hollow. Take me to 42nd Street. I have a friend I can crash with. You okay? I'm fine, Sarah, Clear's throat said, staring out the window as the skyline, Dominic's kingdom, blurred behind the rain. I'm just giving someone some space. When she arrived at her friend Brenda's apartment, she didn't cry. She sat on the couch, shivering, and made a plan. Dominic wanted an empty house. He wanted to stop being suffocated. Fine. She wasn't just going to leave. She was going to disappear. She was going to give him so much space he would choke on it. Back at the gala, Dominic felt a sudden sharp chill run down his spine. He turned, scanning the room, his vampire senses flaring. For a split second, he thought he smelled her cheap vanilla shampoo and rain. Clear's throat. But when he looked at the pillar near the exit, there was no one there. Just a discarded masquerade mask lying in the gutter outside, washing away into the sewer. Is something wrong? Vanessa, Clear's throat asked. Dominic frowned, rubbing his chest where an inexplicable emptiness had just settled. No, he lied, nothing at all. The rain had not let up. If anything, it had hardened, turning into a cold, relentless sheet of water that battered the city. It was 3:45 a.m. when Sarah, Clear's throat, returned to the penthouse. She knew she had exactly 45 minutes before Dominic returned from the gala. He always stayed for the after-hours politics, the part where the elder vampires traded secrets over glasses of vintage blood. Sarah didn't turn on the main lights. She didn't want the apartment to wake up. She wanted to move through it like a ghost. She navigated by the ambient glow of the city, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The penthouse felt massive without Dominic filling the space with his brooding presence. The ceilings felt too high, the marble too hard, the air too sterile. She walked into the master bedroom. The bed was still made crisp and military tight, just the way the housekeeping staff left it. She pulled her battered wheelie suitcase from the back of the walk-in closet. The sound of the zipper opening, zip, was violently loud in the silence. She began to pack, but this wasn't just packing, it was a segregation of assets. On the left side of the closet hung the clothes Dominic had bought her, silk gowns in emerald and sapphire, cashmere sweaters that cost more than her father's car, designer heels with red bottoms. They were beautiful. They were armor he had bought her, so she wouldn't embarrass him in front of his council. She didn't touch them. On the right side were her things, the faded jeans with the fraying hem, the oversized hoodies from her college days, the waitressing uniforms that smelled faintly of sanitizer, the sneakers with the worn-out insoles. She packed only the right side. She moved with a slow, deliberate numbness. Every item she folded was a memory she was putting away. Here is the sweater I wore when we watched movies on the floor. Fold, pack. Here is the scarf I wore the night he told me he was a vampire. Fold, pack. When the suitcase was full, she went to the bathroom. She swept her toiletries into a plastic bag. Toothbrush, a face wash, a half-empty bottle of cheap perfume. She looked at the counter. There, sitting in a crystal dish, was the engagement ring he had given her 6 months ago. It wasn't an official engagement. Vampires didn't do marriage quickly, but it was a promise ring. A 4-carat diamond that felt heavy on her hand. She slid it off her finger. For the first time in months, her skin felt light. She placed the ring on the cold marble of the vanity. Next to it, she placed the credit card he had given her for emergencies. Next to that, the key fob to the penthouse. She walked back out to the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. She opened it. The thermos of O-negative blood was still there, sitting behind the kale, exactly where she had left it. A sticky note was attached to it. "Love you, Dom." Sarah stared at her own handwriting. It looked like it had been written by a stranger, a naive girl who thought love was enough to bridge the gap between predator and prey. She reached in, took Clear's throat the thermos, and poured the thick, dark red liquid down the sink. She watched it swirl into the drain, disappearing into the dark piping of the city. Then she washed the thermos, dried it, and placed it in her bag. It was her thermos. He didn't get to keep that. She didn't write a long letter. She didn't scream on paper. She knew that for a man like Dominic, a man of logic and cold intellect, emotion was just noise. If she wrote a tearful letter, he would read it as suffocating drama. Instead, she tore a single piece of paper from the notepad by the phone. She wrote 3 sentences. "I heard you tonight. You won't be suffocated anymore. The vine has been cut." She placed the note on the kitchen island right in the center of the sprawling granite slab. It looked tiny in the vastness of his home. Sarah grabbed the handle of her suitcase. She paused at the door. She looked back one last time. Clear's throat. She tried to feel sad. She tried to conjure up the image of the Dominic she loved, the one who had once held her during a thunderstorm. But all she could see was the man standing in the ballroom, calling her Clear's throat pathetic. All she could feel was the shame that had burned through her at the gala. "Goodbye, Dominic," she whispered to the empty room. She opened the door, stepped out, and let it click shut. The sound was final. It was the sound of a book closing. She took the service elevator down so she wouldn't run into the doorman. She walked out the back exit into the rain, dragging her life behind her in a suitcase with a wobbly wheel. Dominic Blackwood returned home at 4:30 a.m. The ride home in the limousine had been quiet. He was in a foul mood, though he couldn't quite articulate why. The gala had been a success. He had solidified an alliance with the Vanderhoven clan. He had managed to avoid a war with the Chicago faction for another week. Vanessa had been accommodating in her sharp, icy way, but the itch under his skin remained, a low-level anxiety that he blamed on the rainy weather. As the elevator opened directly into his penthouse, he loosened his tie, ready to exhale. He expected the usual sensory assault that greeted him when he came home. Usually, the lights would be dimmed to a warm yellow. There would be soft jazz playing. Sarah loved Chet Baker. The smell of something human, vanilla, warm skin, or whatever herbal tea she was drinking, would hit him, and then the inevitable pitter-patter of her feet running to greet him. The questions, how was it? Are you tired? Did you eat? He braced himself for it. He prepared his, I am tired, let me be face. The elevator doors slid open. Darkness, not the warm, dimmed darkness of a sleeping home, but the cold, absolute darkness of a void. Dominic stepped out. Sarah. His voice echoed off the glass walls. There was no answer. He frowned. She must be asleep. Usually she waited up, but perhaps she had finally listened to him and gone to bed early. Good. This was what he wanted. Peace. Quiet. He walked into the living room, stripping off his tuxedo jacket and tossing it onto the sofa. He breathed in deeply. Silence. But as he stood there, the vampire in him realized something was wrong. The air tasted sterile. He could smell the ozone of the rain. He could smell the leather of the furniture. He could smell the faint chemical scent of the cleaning products the maid used, but he couldn't smell her. Her scent, that distinct mix of lavender laundry detergent and living, pulsing blood, was fading. It was stale like a perfume sprayed hours ago. Dominic walked to the kitchen. He was thirsty. He opened the fridge, reaching for the thermos he knew would be there. His hand grasped empty air. The spot behind the kale was empty. He stared at the shelf. A flicker of irritation rose in his chest. Did she forget? She never forgot. Sarah's entire existence seemed dedicated to anticipating his needs. He closed the fridge door a little harder than necessary. He turned around and saw the piece of paper on the island. He picked it up. His eyes, capable of reading the date on a coin from a mile away, scanned the 3 handwritten lines. I heard you tonight. You won't be suffocated anymore. The vine has been cut. Dominic stood frozen. The paper crinkled slightly in his grip. I heard you. The memory of the gala rushed back. The balcony, Vanessa, the champagne. She's suffocating me. Pathetic. A burden. His stomach dropped. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in decades. A sudden, sickening lurch of vertigo. She had been there. How? He hadn't sensed her. The mask. He realized. The cheap mask in the gutter. Sarah. He roared, the sound shattering the stillness. He blurred into motion, using his supernatural speed. He was in the bedroom in a fraction of a second. Sarah, come out. This isn't funny. He flicked on the lights. The bed was made. The room was pristine. He ripped open the closet doors. The sight hit him harder than a wooden stake. The left side was full. The silk, the velvet, the furs, all there. The right side was a gaping maw of emptiness. The wooden hangers were bare. The floor where her shoes usually lay in a chaotic pile was swept clean. She hadn't just left. She had purged herself. He ran to the bathroom. The counter was clear. No toothbrush, no hairbrush, no clutter, just the ring. Dominic picked up the diamond ring. It was cold to the touch. He remembered the day he gave it to her. She had cried. She had told him it was too much. He had insisted, telling her it was a mark of his protection. Now it sat in his palm like a piece of dead glass. And the key? He gripped the key so hard the metal bent. No, he muttered, shaking his head. A laugh bubbled up in his throat, a jagged, incredulous sound. No, she's bluffing. She had to be. Sarah was Sarah. She was the one who texted him 10 times a day. She was the one who forgave him when he missed her birthday because of a feeding issue. She was the one who loved him with a desperate, pathetic intensity. People like that didn't just leave. They made scenes. They cried. They threatened. They didn't vanish in silence. She was probably at that diner or at that friend's house in Queens, Brenda. He pulled out his phone. He dialed her number. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time." Blocked. He dialed again. Same result. He threw the phone onto the bed. He began to pace. The silence of the apartment, which he had craved just hours ago, now felt oppressive. It was pressing in on his eardrums. It was too quiet. Where was the heartbeat? He stopped in the middle of the room and closed his eyes. He focused his hearing, extending his senses outward, past the glass walls, out into the city. He could hear millions of hearts, the frantic rhythm of a drug deal in the alley, the slow thump of a sleeping child in the apartment below. But he couldn't find hers. That specific skipping rhythm that always sped up when he entered the room. It was gone. He walked back to the living room and poured himself a drink. His hand was shaking, just a tremor. "She'll be back," he told himself, taking a large gulp of the bourbon. "She's hurt. She's teaching me a lesson. I'll give her a day. 2 days. She'll run out of money. She'll miss the luxury. She'll miss me." He sat down in his leather armchair, the one he forbade her from sitting in because it was an antique. He looked around the room. It was perfect. Not a cushion out of place, no cheap sneakers in the hallway, no smell of cooking oil. "Finally," he said aloud. Space. The word hung in the air, flat and dead. He sat there for an hour, then 2. At 6:00 a.m., the sun began to rise over Manhattan. Usually Sarah would be up by now, closing the heavy blackout curtains to protect him from the light. Dominic sat still. The sun crept across the floor, burning his skin where it touched his hand. He didn't move. He watched the dust motes dancing in the beam of light. For the first time in 2 years, the Vampire King was completely, utterly alone. And as the silence stretched into the morning, the realization began to sink in, cold and heavy as a tombstone. He hadn't been suffocating, he had been breathing, and now the air was gone. 32 days. That was how long it had been since the apartment went quiet. Dominic Blackwood sat in his study, the room shrouded in shadows despite it being noon. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, sealing the room in a perpetual artificial night. On the desk in front of him lay a stack of urgent documents, acquisition mergers, territory disputes in Queens, and a formal request from the High Council regarding the Chicago threat. They had been sitting there for a week, gathering dust. Dominic wasn't reading. He was staring at a coffee mug. It was a cheap, chipped ceramic mug with a cartoon cat on it. It had been Sarah's favorite. She had left it behind, likely by accident, tucked away on a high shelf in the kitchen. It was the only artifact of her existence remaining in the penthouse. Dominic reached out, tracing the rim of the mug with a pale finger. He brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply. The scent was faint, fading molecules of hazelnut creamer and her skin, but it was there. It was the only thing in the entire world that smelled real. "Sir?" Dominic didn't look up. Silas, his head of security, stood in the doorway. Silas was a man of few words, a vampire turned during the Civil War, and he had never seen his master like this. "Report!" Dominic rasped. His voice was dry, unused. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 days. "We checked the friend in Queens." "Brenda," Silas said, stepping into the room cautiously. "She claims she hasn't seen Sarah in 3 weeks. Says Sarah stayed for 2 nights, then packed up and left. Said she was going to start over where no one knew her name." Dominic's hand tightened around the handle of the cat mug. "And the credit cards?" "Untouched. She's using cash. No paper trail, no digital footprint." Silas paused, shifting his weight. "It's impressive, sir. She learned tradecraft from watching you. She knows exactly how we track people, and she is doing the exact opposite." Dominic let out a low, bitter laugh. "I taught her well, didn't I? I taught her how to hide from monsters. I just didn't think I would be the monster she was hiding from." "We could expand the search," Silas suggested. "Use the telepaths. Sweep the state." "No," Dominic snapped, his eyes flashing a dangerous crimson. "No telepaths. If she senses us in her head, she will run further. She is fragile, Silas. If she is pushed, she breaks. Or maybe," a treacherous voice whispered in his mind, "she is already broken and you are just haunting the pieces." Silas bowed his head. "As you wish. But, sir, Vanessa is here." Dominic's expression hardened into stone. "Send her away." "I cannot." Vanessa's voice drifted in from the hallway. She swept into the room, ignoring Silas, who wisely retreated. She looked impeccable in a crimson dress, but her eyes scanned the messy study with disdain. "Look at you!" she sneered, walking over to the desk. She picked up a stack of unread papers and dropped them. They scattered across the floor. "The king of the eastern seaboard, moping in the dark like a sullen teenager. It has been a month, Dominic. Get over it." Dominic looked up at her. For the first time, he saw Vanessa not as an equal, but as a stranger. Her beauty was cold, sharp, and utterly unappealing. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I understand perfectly, Bin," Vanessa countered, leaning against the desk. "You wanted space. You got space. You won." Clear's throat. "The little pet is gone. You should be celebrating. You should be reclaiming your territory." "It is not space," Dominic whispered. He stood up, towering over her, his presence suddenly filling the room with a suffocating pressure. "It is a vacuum, Vanessa. Do you know what happens in a vacuum? Nothing survives. There is no sound, no air, no life." He walked past her to the window, pulling back the curtain just an inch. The slice of sunlight burned his skin, but he didn't flinch. He needed the pain to feel something other than the numbness. "I can't feed properly," he confessed, his back to her. "The blood, it tastes like ash. I drink, but the hunger doesn't stop. It's not a hunger of the body." Vanessa sighed, her tone softening slightly, though it was still laced with arrogance. "It's withdrawal, Dominic. You became addicted to her adoration. It will pass. You are immortal. A human life is a blink of an eye to us. In 50 years you won't even remember her face." Dominic whipped around, his fangs fully extended, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. He moved so fast, Vanessa didn't even have time to flinch. He pinned her against the bookshelf, his hand around her throat, not to kill, but to silence her. "Do not," he snarled, his face inches from hers, "ever say that again. I will remember her for every second of eternity, because her absence is the only thing that feels like time passing." Before her, days were just a loop. With her, time moved, and now it has stopped. He released her, stepping back, disgusted with himself. "Get out," he commanded. Vanessa straightened her dress, looking shaken but trying to maintain her dignity. "The Chicago clan is making moves in the Bronx. Dominic, if you don't get your head in the game, you won't have a kingdom left to mourn in." She turned and left. Dominic stood alone in the silence. He looked back at the mug on his desk. Space, he thought. I wanted space. He picked up the mug and hurled it against the far wall. It shattered into 100 pieces. He stared at the shards, expecting satisfaction. But all he felt was a fresh wave of agony. Now even the memory was broken. He sank to his knees, picking up the sharp pieces of ceramic one by one. Indifferent to the way they sliced his skin. He had to find her, not to drag her back, not to own her, just to breathe the same air she did, just to know that the world hadn't actually ended. The neon sign above the door flickered ominously. The rusty anchor. The R was burnt out, so it read the Justi Anchor. It was a dive bar in the deepest, grittiest part of the South Bronx. The kind of place where the floor was permanently sticky, the air smelled of stale beer and regret, and the patrons didn't ask questions. It was perfect. Sarah wiped down the bar top with a rag that was grey with age. She wore a baggy flannel shirt, dark jeans and combat boots. Her hair, once long and curled for Dominic, was chopped short to her chin and dyed a stark matte black. She wore no makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. "Hey, new girl, another round," a gravelly voice called out. "Coming," Sarah said. Her voice was lower, flatter. The bubbly waitress from the midnight diner was gone. This woman was named Sam. She poured a whiskey neat and slid it down the bar to the biker with the scarred knuckles. He grunted a thanks. Sarah didn't flinch. In the last month, she had learned that fear was a scent. Dominic had taught her that inadvertently. Predators smell the adrenaline, Sarah. Be calm even when you are terrified. So she was calm. When a fight broke out near the pool table last week, she had simply vaulted over the bar and whistled so loud it shattered a glass, telling them to take it outside. They listened. She was exhausted. Her bones ached, and she was living in a studio apartment the size of Dominic's walk-in closet that smelled of boiled cabbage. But she was breathing. She wasn't waiting for a text. She wasn't analyzing the tone of a She wasn't wondering if she was suffocating someone. Here she was invisible, and in invisibility she found a strange, lonely freedom. The door to the bar creaked open. A gust of cold wind blew in, carrying the scent of rain. The chatter in the bar didn't stop, but the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Sarah looked up. 3 men walked in. They didn't look like the usual clientele of dock workers and bikers. They wore long trench coats that were too nice for this neighborhood. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace that Sarah recognized instantly. Vampires. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her face to remain stone. "Don't run. Don't look away too quickly. Just be the bartender." She turned her back to them to arrange some glasses, watching them in the reflection of the dirty mirror behind the bar. They took a booth in the dark corner. The leader was a man with stark, white-blonde hair and eyes that looked like frozen coins. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow. Sarah's blood ran cold. She remembered the file on Dominic's desk, the threat assessment. Caleb, the lieutenant of the Chicago clan, the ones who were hunting Dominic's territory. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. She had run away from the king only to land in the lap of his enemies. She took a deep breath. "They don't know who I am," she told herself. "To them, I'm just a human servant, just a blood bag with a pulse." She grabbed a notepad and walked over to their table. She didn't tremble. "What can I get you?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the table, not their faces. Caleb looked up. His gaze was heavy, weighing her soul. "Whiskey, the whole bottle, and 3 clean glasses. If they are dirty, I will make you eat them." The other 2 men chuckled. It was a low, hungry sound. "Right away," Sarah said. Her voice didn't waver. She went back to the bar, grabbed a sealed bottle of Jameson and 3 glasses. She polished the glasses aggressively until they squeaked. She returned to the table and set them down. "Leave the bottle," Caleb said, watching her hands. Sarah nodded and turned to leave. "Wait," Caleb said. Sarah froze. She slowly turned back. "Yeah." Caleb leaned forward, sniffing the air. "You smell different." "I smell like bleach and beer," Sarah said deadpan. "It's part of the charm." Caleb smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It showed too many teeth. "No, you smell like old magic. You smell like high-grade protection." He squinted at her. "Who are you, little mouse?" "I'm Sam," she lied, "and I have other customers." She turned to walk away, dismissing a vampire lieutenant as if he were a drunk regular. The bar went silent. The other 2 vampires started to rise, their eyes turning black, offended by her insolence. Caleb raised a hand, stopping them. He was staring at Sarah's retreating back with a look of genuine intrigue. "Sit down," Caleb ordered his men. "But she disrespected you," one hissed. "No," Caleb murmured, pouring the whiskey. "She didn't show fear. A human standing in front of 3 apex predators, and her heart rate didn't even spike." He took a sip, his eyes never leaving Sarah as she began washing dishes. "That is not a normal human," Caleb mused. "That is someone who has walked with wolves or kings. And I want to know why she is hiding in a dump like this." Sarah felt his eyes on the back of her neck. They felt like crosshairs. She scrubbed a plate harder. She knew she had to leave tonight. She had to pack her bag and run again. But as she reached for the next glass, the door opened again. This time it wasn't Clear's throat a vampire. It was a man in a soaking wet trench coat, holding a familiar device, a tracker that was glowing a faint blue. It was Silas. Sarah dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor. Silas looked up, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto hers. Relief and sorrow washed over his face. "Sarah," he mouthed. At the corner table, Caleb saw the exchange. He saw the recognition. He saw the expensive suit of the newcomer, Dominic Blackwood's head of security. Caleb stood up slowly, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Well, well," Caleb whispered. "It seems we have found something much more valuable than whiskey." Sarah looked from Silas to Caleb. She was trapped. On one side, the life she fled. On the other, the war she wanted no part of. She did the only thing she could think of. She reached under the bar, grabbed the sawed-off shotgun the owner kept for robberies, and racked the slide. The sound, chunk, echoed through the silent bar. "Get out!" she screamed, pointing the barrel not at Caleb, but at Silas. "I told you to leave me alone," Clear's throat. Silas raised his hands slowly. "Sarah, please, he is dying without you." "I don't care," she yelled, tears finally pricking her eyes. "He wanted space. I'm giving him space." "And who?" Caleb's voice purred from behind her. "Is he?" Sarah spun around, the gun shaking in her hands. Caleb stepped into the light, looking at Silas, then back at Sarah. The realization hit him. Blackwood. Caleb laughed, a sound of pure delight. "You're Blackwood's girl," the one he cast aside. He looked at Sarah with a new, terrifying appreciation. "The king's weakness," Caleb said softly, "found in the trash." He moved faster than Sarah could pull the trigger. He was a blur of motion. He knocked the gun from her hand and wrapped an arm around her neck, pulling her back against his chest. His fangs grazed her ear. "Silas, isn't it?" Caleb called out to the horrified bodyguard. "Go tell your king that Caleb of Chicago sends his regards. Tell him I found his missing heart." He tightened his grip on Sarah, who was struggling, gasping for air. "And tell him if he wants it back, he's going to have to bleed for it." The air in the rusty anchor didn't just grow cold, it turned solid. Silas stepped aside, bowing his head low. The wooden doors of the bar didn't push. They simply swung inward, admitting a shadow darker than the night outside. Dominic Blackwood walked in. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo or his Italian suits. He was wearing a long black wool coat soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked wild, unhinged, terrifying. Caleb, still holding Sarah in a chokehold, tightened his grip. "Stay back, Blackwood. I'll snap her neck before you can blink." Dominic stopped 10 paces away. He didn't look at Caleb. He looked only at Sarah. He took in her black hair, her combat boots, the dark circles under her eyes, the fear mixed with defiance in her gaze. He saw the woman she had become in his absence, harder, stronger, and infinitely more beautiful. "You said she was trash," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated the glass bottles behind the bar. "You said I cast her aside, didn't you?" Caleb sneered, dragging Sarah back a step. "She's waiting tables in a rat hole. You wanted space. I'm just helping you clean up the mess." "I was a fool," Dominic said, his voice cracking. It was the first time anyone in that room had heard the king's voice break. "I was drowning, Caleb, but not because of her. I was drowning because I didn't know how to swim in the ocean of her love. I pushed away the only air I had." Sarah's breath hitched. She stopped struggling. She looked at Dominic, really looked at him. He looked wrecked. His skin was grey, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who had spent 32 days dying. "Let her go," Dominic whispered. "Take my territory, take the Bronx, take the damn crown. Just let her go." Caleb laughed, incredulous. "The king of the East trading his kingdom for a human girl. You really are pathetic." "No." Sarah spoke up. Her voice was raspy but loud. Caleb looked down at her, surprised. "Shut up, he's not trading the kingdom." Sarah gritted out. She slammed the heel of her heavy combat boot down onto Caleb's instep with all the force of a woman who had been carrying heavy trays for a month. Caleb roared in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. "He is the kingdom!" Sarah yelled. That split second was all Dominic needed. He didn't move like a man. He moved like a storm. He bridged the gap in a heartbeat. He didn't strike Caleb. He simply tore him away from Sarah, hurling the vampire lieutenant across the room. Caleb crashed into the pool table, splintering it into matchsticks. Before Caleb's men could react, Silas was upon them. The bar erupted into chaos, but for Dominic and Sarah, the world narrowed down to a single point. Dominic stood before her, his chest heaving. Blood, Caleb's blood, stained his hands, but he didn't reach for her. He kept his hands at his sides, respecting the invisible line between them. "Sarah," he breathed. Sarah stood her ground. She was shaking, but she didn't fall into his arms. She crossed her own arms over her chest. "You found me," she said flatly. "I have been in hell," Dominic said, "every second of every day. I tried to drink and it was ash. I tried to sleep and it was a coffin. The silence, Sarah, the silence was louder than any scream. You gave me space and it destroyed me." "You asked for it," Sarah reminded him, tears finally spilling over. "You told Vanessa I was suffocating you. You called me a burden." "I lied," Dominic roared, startling her. He dropped to his knees right there on the sticky, beer-stained floor of the dive bar, the vampire king kneeling in the dirt. "I lied because I was scared. I was scared of how much I needed you. I was scared that without you, I am nothing but a monster in a suit. I pushed you away to prove I was strong, and I proved nothing but my own stupidity." He looked up at her, his eyes shimmering with red tears. "Please suffocate me, surround me. Never give me a moment of peace again. Just come home." Sarah looked down at him. She saw the raw, bleeding sincerity in his eyes. She loved him. Clear as throat. She would always love him, but she wasn't the same girl who had left the thermos in the fridge. She stepped forward and placed a hand on his cheek. He leaned into it, closing his eyes as if he were starving, and she was sustenance. "I won't come back to the penthouse," she said softly. Dominic's eyes snapped open, panic seizing him. "Sarah, I won't come back as a pet," she corrected him firmly. "I won't be the girl waiting by the window. I keep this job. I keep my own life. If you want to be with me, you fit into my world. You don't just pull me into yours." Dominic let out a breath, a shuddering sound of relief. He covered her hand with his own. "Anything," Clear's throat. "I will buy this bar. I will wash the glasses. I will do whatever you say. Just don't disappear again." Sarah smiled a small, tired, genuine smile. "Okay, Dom," Clear's throat. "Okay." Dominic stood up, pulling her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of bleach and cheap soap as if it were the finest perfume in existence. In the corner, Silas stood over the unconscious form of Caleb. He watched his master holding the human girl, not like a possession, but like a lifeline. The king had his crown back, but more importantly he had his heart, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would never, ever ask for space again. Dominic Blackwood learned the hardest lesson of his immortal life that month. Be careful what you wish for, because the silence you crave might just be the echo of your own loneliness. He thought love was a tool, only to realize it was the only thing keeping him from falling into the abyss. Sarah didn't just teach him a lesson, she reshaped his entire world. She showed him that true power isn't about standing alone at the top. It's about having someone brave enough to stand there with you even when the world is dark. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder, but for the Vampire King, absence nearly stopped his heart altogether. If you enjoyed this story of heartbreak, redemption, and supernatural romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. What do you think? Was Sarah right to make him wait, or should she have forgiven him sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story.